Red light, green light, red light, green light, red light, green light, red light, green light, red light.
Well, look who we are. It's that time of the year again. It's the festive season, but most importantly, it's another episode of the Soul Sessions, of course, with your host as always, Soul. So grab that pint, pull up a chair, because with us today, well, former FCW heavyweight champion and current DCW champion, Euan G Mackie. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you very much. So, I'm very privileged to be here. Thank you.
Hey, honor mine as well, my friend. Thank you very much. But of course, Euan, you know, as I say, every guest has a story. Every story has a beginning. Euan, how did your story begin as a wrestling fan?
As a fan, I'll try and keep this brief because I'm known to ramble on. So I'm going to try my best not to take this off in a weird direction. But we'll go back to 1994, where some of the listeners probably weren't born. And in that year, my friend had kind of introduced me to wrestling. I knew about wrestling. I'd seen it on television, well, little bits of it, and I thought it was quite barbaric and mindless a little bit. Maybe I should still be thinking that. But a lot of friends in school were into it. But one friend in particular actually just introduced it to me by showing me a match. And this was Adam Bomb against Tony DeVito on some episode of Superstars, I think it was. And I was suddenly just blown away when Adam Bomb came out. He had he had the mad welding goggles on. His eyes were glowing like a kind of like almost with radiation, and his singlet looked incredible. And he got into the ring. Now I could be wrong about the name of the talent he was against, but I watched them like deal out a couple of blows to each other, and then the match ended, and I thought, wow, okay. So I thought, because I'd seen loads of people within wrestling carrying weapons. The Legion of Doom had spiked shoulder pads. I saw the face paint. I'd been told by friends of mine as well that Roddy Piper strangled people with kilts and like tartan scarves. And I thought, is that real? And people were telling me Earthquake killed people, Undertaker killed people. And I thought, I have no interest. This isn't sport. This is barbaric. But then I watched the match and I thought, I get it. I get it now. I know what this is. And at the time, I was completely blown away by what I'd just seen. And the match was maybe only about 7 minutes long. But what I thought was incredible was the fact that it looked like a mixture of sport and theatre. And I'd grown up with 80s cartoons, being born like like I was going to say in the middle of the 80s. That's not strictly true. A wee bit away from the middle of the 80s towards the other direction. 1984. So I was growing up when I was younger with Thundercats, Teenage Mutant and Hero Turtles in the UK, but Ninja Turtles, Transformers, He-Man. And I saw, for real, right in front of me, real superheroes, real supervillains. And I thought, this is amazing. And it totally swept me up. At 10 years old, I thought, this is something, like, it seemed so far away and like a prospect of something I could never achieve. But at the time when I was young and I saw wrestling, I thought, this is it. This is the closest we can be to superheroes. So that's what drew me in. And as soon as I saw Doink the Clown, I was sold completely. Like, I thought you wouldn't expect a clown to wrestle. So as soon as I saw Doink the Clown and the creep, even though it was 1994 and he was being less of a kind of creepy clown, I was renting videos from Global Video, which was down in Kirkcaldy High Street, just to watch other wrestling shows. And friends of mine that liked wrestling were giving me their taped events like WrestleMania 9. And I was seeing, I'd even got to the library and picked out all the books that there were like little WCW annuals and stuff like that. So I was learning about other places that weren't just the WWF when I was younger. So from there, so everything built up to where we are now. That's the answer to that question.
Hey, a great good start, and it just shows the love of wrestling can, you know, transcend time periods from the 80s to the 90s to the times we are now. But you mentioned obviously Adam Bomb there and having, you know, the welding goggles. That's quite an iconic look. And, you know, I think of, you know, Road Warriors, they had like the American football shoulder pads. You had like the Shield in modern day that had like bulletproof vests, showing that modern day items can have a big connection with a character and with the audience. Is there certain items that you think, maybe household items that you think you and that could make good connection objects with fans?
Well, I think every time somebody sees a folding chair, they think wrestling. because not so much back when I was younger, watching like In Your House 13, I think it was. Shawn Michaels wrestling Mankind and them going back and forward, and there was like kind of table landing. But definitely when I see folding chairs, and when I was younger, as soon as the folding chair was seen, people would always go, "Oh, it's just like in wrestling." But tables eventually come into the fold, which is weird that furniture being used aggressively is somehow like part of the wrestling arsenal, when there's like actual weapons out there, like I mean, people use kendo sticks as well, baseball bats. But when I was younger, you'd see like the warlord carrying like an axe, and I think he can't be allowed to use that, surely. But metal chair is okay. Furniture's fine, not real weapons. You'd be just, you'd be in a lot of bother with that. But I think it really depends what people take and use. Like a lot of like deathmatch wrestling, there's a lot of household items that you would see now and you'd associate it with a death match because people use it really creatively. But I think even something that's quite mundane, like how Nigel McGuinness in his years in Ring of Honor when he was carrying around the iron, and I think his reasoning for it was, well, people are going to wonder who the guy is with the iron and why he's using it. But if you hit somebody quite hard with an iron, that would help. I mean, it's not going to be on unless there's a power source that leads from the iron all the way out the ring. But hitting somebody with an iron could be pretty brutal. And I used to carry around a spade with me as well. So, and I mean, it was a miniature spade as well. It meant I could unscrew it and put it in my case if I took it anywhere, because it was a bit too big for the case. Sometimes I could carry it on top. But I think the weirdest thing, and the best thing, I guess, is the more mundane an item, the more interesting ways that you can use it in the ring, then the more people are going to remember it, I think.
Yeah, very true. And I think it just shows that with the performance of wrestlers, you can get an object, over. People know when it comes out.
Definitely.
Moment. I mean, it's the fascinating aspect of it as well. But obviously, you mentioned there, obviously, tape trading. And I've spoken about tape trading in the past with a couple of other wrestlers of how I feel it's integral to the build-up of the UK scene, because you didn't have tape trading. You wouldn't have got, maybe something like a FMW in Japan or this random indie promotion in the States. Your thoughts on tape trading and its place within UK wrestling history? Do you think it was one of the building blocks for it?
I think so. Like, if I think back to, I mean, only a couple of years, and I was lucky that the internet kind of helped with this. There were a lot of American people I knew chatting about TNA when it first came about, and they were speaking about Ring of Honor, and I had almost no access to this stuff when I was in my late teens and early 20s, and there was a lot of stuff. If I think about Dragon Gate in Japan, DDT in Japan, FMW, if you've said, and some of these things go way far back. A lot of the old WCW events. Now, I think what's important is that if something just like, depending on what channels people have, if something like a wrestling promotion is visible to you and kind of, with no offense to any big companies, shoved down your throat, you don't know anything else. And it's better to see a whole wide spectrum of it, because there's wrestling in general. And I don't know whether or not he'll be watching the Soul Sessions, but it was Chris Renfrew that said, the things are not going to kill wrestling. Wrestling will live on. Wrestling's a lot stronger. Like, booking smaller talent's not going to kill wrestling. Booking silly angles not going to kill wrestling. Exposing the business isn't going to kill wrestling. Wrestling will exist. It's just got multiple facets of it. And the most important thing is when you're trading tapes, you can see a different aspect of it, because I think the best way to look at it is, I had a friend years ago who'd only ever watched the WWE when it was in a phase of huge, big men. So in his mind, that's what wrestlers were. Then I let him see little clips of Ring of Honor where the guys were slightly smaller, styles were slightly different. And he said, I mean, he was complimentary of it, but he said, but that's what my brain's been functioned to convinced it needs to believe in. Wrestlers have got to be big. He's like, these guys are great, but I could battle them. And he's like, I probably couldn't. Some of them are jacked, but I've been made to believe the girls have got to be hot, the guys have got to be huge, and that's how that is. But he'd say, but these guys were better performers. These guys looked like they were a lot more agile and athletic. But he was watching wrestling casually. I think maybe I would be considered a wrestling purist. And I thought, but look at the talents of all of them. You need the big big muscle men. You need the hot lasses, but you need the big lasses, the lasses that look like brawlers. You need all of this stuff. And it's better to keep your mind open. So with trading tapes, you can almost get an interesting window into somebody else's preference for wrestling and appreciate it. Which is why we both know Andy, who books and runs Bleeding Gums. He's a huge deathmatch fan, but he's able to step outside of his love of the ultra violence to look at other aspects of wrestling, to comment on it. And I think that's the best position to be in, is to see all of the wrestling that you can, even the really puerile, silly comedy stuff as well, because there's an audience for that too. And that's the most important thing. If there is an audience for it, then it's likely going to happen. You know, it's likely going to get somewhere.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I would describe wrestling as like a pick and mix. You can put whatever you like in your bag, and you can enjoy the flavors.
Definitely, yeah.
Like obvious, well, like we've seen, like you could have like a Cody Roman's main event at WrestleMania 41, or sorry, WrestleMania 40, but then you could have like a Jackass crew with Johnny Knoxville against Sami Zayn. It has its place. It has its fan base, will have its identities. But obviously, we've seen in modern times, obviously, with AEW and some internet fans that think it's killing the business. They think that Tony Khan doesn't have a good approach to the business. Why do you think maybe there is such a volatile reaction to Tony Khan and AEW? Is it just because they're seen as the number two, they do things differently? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I also think because, and this is no offense to the man himself, Jim Cornette, and it annoys me as well because I've seen a lot of like videos that circulate around Facebook, and what bothers me is that sometimes it's people I know on them, and people will throw out these insults that they've heard Jim Cornette say, and I think the people that are doing this are armchair fans, and a lot of them are possibly come from a casual background, or they've watched one or two products their whole life, and they think they know how the business is to be run. And that's the worst thing, is that they see a lot of vitriol that goes towards Tony Khan's way or AEW's way, and they think they can jump on the back of that to let out their own frustrations about a product. I think that's just proof that they're being led by the product, if you know what I mean. My mindset would be, when I was younger, I would get angry if Doink the Clown lost, or I'd get annoyed if like between some kind of altercation, if DX managed to take down I was going to say the Heart Foundation, but they weren't really around at the same time. But if there was a Heart Foundation, who knows? I'm sure that the seeds were forming. The Heart Foundation was about, and there was, but I kind of got behind aspects of the Nation, Los Boricuas, Disciples of Apocalypse War, and and we're watching it on TV. So my brothers and I would be focused in on this stuff and be angry when our favourites got taken down, or cheering when our favourites managed to get back on top. And I look back and I think we were totally drawn in to what the product's trying to do. And as much as people say, I will never watch AEW again, this was a ridiculous spot, this was a ridiculous match, and then the next week they'll still be posting up about how they didn't really watch the whole show, but they watched this. And you still watched it. You came back to it and you watched it. If you really, really didn't want to watch any of this stuff, you would completely boycott it and never watch it again. You're just angry because the decision hasn't met your expectation. And I realized that when I was, I wouldn't say too young, but I'd get to a certain point, maybe end of the Attitude Era, going, why am I getting so pissed with this? I should just enjoy it for what it is, and like kind of ooh and ah at the good bits, and I'm meant to boo the bits I don't like. That's the point of it. That's where the kind of cathartic reaction comes from. I'm here to either enjoy it or be slightly disappointed, but it's all part of the show, all part of the product. So when people take shots at Tony Khan thinking they can book better, go ahead and do that. See how much talent you can get a hold of, see if you can throw together a show. And it doesn't mean to say that they know what they're talking about. And when they see little clips of shows that have come from the UK or indies in America, and start throwing judgment like indie mud show, these guys can't work, this is dancing, this isn't wrestling. And I think you wouldn't be saying any of that stuff if you hadn't had a kind of alternate response from somebody like Jim Cornette, or perhaps Dutch Mantell or Jim Ross on their podcast, because they've opened the doors for you into the business to let you understand their feelings on it. So and they're highly respected men. So when they say something, a lot of people will parrot that and mimic that and think they suddenly know something. They don't. There will be people who do, but if you hold that one idea of wrestling in your head, then you're not helping yourself or the product by almost like just echoing over and over again. The way that change happens, I think, is sometimes by accident, sometimes the right place, right time. But if there wasn't a product, several wrestling products now that are quite big companies to to be rivals with each other, then you wouldn't get loads of like that. This is what the best thing was for wrestling in the 90s and really in the 80s as well, was products that you could jump between and things that could compete, and you could pick your favorite aspect out of a lot. So I think that when people give online hate like that, unless they know a grand degree about the building, the business from the perspective, not so much the building, the business from where they stand. If they've been a wrestler for years, or they've been a booker, a promoter, a manager, then they might have something they can say in a conversation. If they're just a fan who's sat in an armchair for years or watched it with their friends and had the drink, I don't think you really qualify, apart from letting us know what you like and you don't like, and that's fine, that's what they're doing. But you can't really use the insider terms, but it's been given to them. The door was open and I thought, there we go, here's all the secrets, here's terms you can use. And that suddenly makes people think they're a hell of a lot more knowledgeable when they know what they're talking about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, they think, oh, I could book a show, I could put all the talent together, and then they were like, oh, well, you need to get the ring, you need to get a medical crew there, you need to get a good, services for the talent. And if someone pulls out, they'll probably crumble and think, well, shit, I don't know what to do now. And that shows, the stress of being a booker.
And this shows you how sad I am as well. And this is not a long story, but it's a good one. But not really, I don't know if it's good. People will listen and go, shut up. But we all did it, right? We all did it. My friend and I were young, the same guy that introduced me to wrestling. We made up our own wrestlers. And we used to sometimes put at his granddad's house, put down blankets and plan out our own wrestling characters that we had, and we do our own events, and we had titles. We actually took old school folders that had the weird. It feels like leather. It's not. You just take the off the folder, and you're left with a cardboard bit. We used to make cardboard belts and wrap make a belt shape that would fit around us with the back, the clips, they're not the bulldog clips, but the clips that go in like that. We'd make an opposite side of it, and they would hold on like that, so you could actually clip the belts on, and we would portray our characters and think out the matches and the stories and things we'd do. But when we got too old to do that, and I don't mean too old as in we were in a mid-teens and thought maybe we should probably stop doing this. But we ended up keeping the characters on, and we'd make them on wrestling games. And we thought about it was almost like how people do fantasy soccer leagues and stuff like that. We thought about the money we'd have to pay these guys. In cases we had a huge roster, and we thought, we're going to have to cut some talent. You don't get a lot of 15 to 16-year-old kids thinking, how are we going to work this angle, and how are we going to cut we need to build up the talent that we've got. And it got to the point where, to this day, I've still got these characters on No Mercy on the N64. Some of the characters, and they've gone through several games. We used to sit and think about what must go into wrestling rather than just the angles. But then we'd play with our friends and we'd put Attitude on, like the Acclaim game on the PlayStation, and they'd all want to go like Triple H, Triple H, Triple H in a big rumble. They'd all pick the same character, and we'd be left with our custom characters that we'd spent ages thinking about what they could do, what their moves were, what the whole premise was for their wrestling character. We go back even further. We used to bring the ring out on a summer's day, the old Hasbro WWF ring, get our wrestlers in, and as soon as we put the wrestlers out, we'll have a Royal Rumble. We'd watch as Bret Hart, The Undertaker, Shawn Michaels, all these guys disappeared, and I'd be left with like Kamala and the Nasty Boys as my guys. And as soon as they came into the ring, we'd get told, "Oh no, Undertaker throws Jerry Sags out." And I'd be like, "He's just got in. He's we need some villains in the ring if the good guys are going to eliminate them, And they were like, "Oh, but Undertaker's won every Rumble." This time in like 1996, I'd be like, "He hasn't won a Rumble. You don't know anything about wrestling, Euan." Suddenly having an argument whether or not Kamala's a friend of mine thought that Mantar in the '95 Rumble was Kamala, and I'm like, Kamala's black, Mantar's white. And he's like, oh, well, you're not paying attention. So my point being is that when we were surrounded by the regular fans, I found a lot of the time that I was still a fan, but I jumped over that to the point where my head couldn't stop thinking about other aspects about what wrestling was. And I think that disappears when, as you say, some fans don't think about it. I could do better. I'd have this. I'd have this guy. And I think, would you genuinely know how to build up a show that could bring people back? Do you genuinely know how you could create a product that people would want to see? Because somebody might want to have 8 high-flying matches. That would be probably entertaining for some shows, and indeed some shows would have that. But you might be doing it in front of an audience that just wants pantomime. They want wrestling they can comprehend. They're not all wrestling fans. If you put on a kind of a work shoot style promotion, some folk would maybe love the grittiness of it. Other kids might be sitting in the audience kind of, put off because the guys weren't working the crowd. They were actually in. I'm thinking of like the UWF, but I think that if you tried to create a product that looks so real, it might put off kids that have come for a bit of superhero silliness. You know how I mean? And I guess that's up to what promoters want to do. But you'd be silly not to promote to an audience rather than just yourself and what you want. But that's sometimes promoters just do that. They just put on what they would like to see.
Sometimes they do indeed. But I think that's the funny thing about the UK scene in itself. It's variable. You could get something like the Mega Slam shows that go to the holiday park. You could get like a Progress Retro, obviously Bleeding Gums death matches, TNT Extreme. You get the whole circle of variable flavors. But I also know the UK scene maybe mid 2000s was quite minimal. Like I believe there's only a couple of promotions. I remember seeing Drew McIntyre's 24 documentary on the WWE Network about how you had to travel all the way down south to learn wrestling. There was nothing up in Scotland. What was it like? Obviously, back in the day, mid 2000s times of Scottish wrestling in particular, was it quite barren?
It was barren to a degree. Yeah, there was a lot. There was a lot. There wasn't a lot there, but there was a lot of potential, I think, for things to develop. Because the guys in the environment were determined and hungry. Excuse me. Hungry in a sense where they wanted to learn. So some of them were quite ready to go down from, even prior to the noughties, they were quite happy to go down to anywhere they could to learn wrestling. I was waiting for that. And in some cases, the guys were only going to get maybe about 15, 20 minutes of advice and a bit of training before a show would start. And if they'd been lucky enough to be on the card, they were going in there with a kind of, I wouldn't say limited like they were stupid, but limited knowledge because they obviously didn't know everything. And there was a period of time in the noughties. When I came along, it was like 2007. So I was lucky that things had been established, like SWA existed, and it had in the form of SCW before. BCW it was existing. W3L had been around for a while. SWE had been about for a while, so there were still people that had learned and taken their knowledge elsewhere and started something in Scotland. But things were like beginning to sizzle slightly when I got involved. So by the time I'd come along, I still saw how barren things were. But prior to that, people who were training would say, look, we didn't have much of a choice. We'd have to go down to a seminar that might be being run in England, or we'd have to get off on the back of the shows and just follow people about. And John Short, who's sadly not with us, was a good and well-known announcer. I learned throughout the years I'd known John about how he'd come across multiple people who were just interested in being part of the show. They wanted to learn. They wanted to be part of just wrestling in general. And John, as I learned, if John let you into a building, then everyone knew you were good. Everyone knew that, that there might be something there. And we were talking about at his funeral, a lot of the guys had been fortunate that because they'd tried to get involved with wrestling, and there were wrestlers desperate to keeping the business kind of clean and didn't want new people coming in, wanted to keep their spots safe, and would just tell kids to disappear in no uncertain terms. And they would be cruel about it because if they were villains, they could just go fuck off. The kids would leave. But if John let the kids in or let the younger guys in, folk would think, okay, if he thinks you're good or he thinks you're capable or he thinks you've maybe got something, it was harsher, and a scene that had less in it kind of allowed people to seek a lot more success. And I don't mean they're suddenly world champion. I mean, success was getting a match. Success was making it through a training session and understanding the lessons you'd learned. And I found that with myself, like that mindset was still there. I got taught lessons in training that weren't moves, or they weren't spots, or it wasn't character work or anything like that. It was a case of being put in a submission for real, all because I'd been happy to put people in like the Scorpion Deathlock or like a camel clutch. Then I'd be put in a real submission to see if I would be able to handle it. And I wouldn't know at first. And then eventually I would realize, oh yeah, okay, I'm being schooled here. I'm being humbled in a way. And it was the same with chops. It was a case of, right, well, I'm not going to be teachers and trainers that would say, I'm not teaching you chops. That's something someone somewhere will show you, and you'll learn that once you're hit. You'll know how to deliver one back. But you'd still get chopped. You'd still be shown. You think if you were hit, it was a case of, if I'm hitting you hard now, just wait till that's in front of people in the ring. And then you'll see how hard it is. But because that mindset was there, it was easier to weed out the people that probably shouldn't be there. And because it was Sabaran, if you got several matches in several places, you felt good about that. You thought, I've achieved something. You weren't thinking about a belt. You weren't thinking about, your next T-shirt that was going to, well, some people, your next T-shirt that had your slogan on it or something. What you were thinking about was, I'm getting somewhere gradually. And in that case, wrestling not having as many options, now it does. And with no insult to anyone who's wrestling in Scotland and England now, it's easy to find a promotion. It's easy to find a place. And if you wanted to work one place your whole life, you could. But back when it was as barren as it was, it encouraged you to get better. It encouraged you to pay attention. It encouraged you to show up on time. And you realized, okay, I didn't get what I wanted. And I got maybe 3 minutes of a match. I was told what spots I was doing. But to look back on it, you think it was a privilege to be in the ring. And it was a privilege to learn from guys who had it even harder than I had. So looking at how the scene was, it was good that attitude remained. I think as time went by, that attitude's still there and people still keep it flowing. But there's a bit more entitlement now. People feel like they can be a bit more angry and they feel like they're owed a bit more. But wrestling owes you nothing. And you can benefit from the hard work that you put in. But sometimes that hard work's just, it's not good enough. And again, that is not an insult to anybody, but there were people who could travel around and train and train and train. And there's people that I met that became referees or announcers back when I started that were like, yeah, I trained for a wee while and I didn't enjoy it, but I came back to do refereeing. And then some of the wrestlers would go, yeah, he used to pussy out of taking this, he used to pussy out of that, he used to not be able to handle the journeys. And that's how the weak were almost picked off. But they found another way to be involved with wrestling. So fair play to them.
Yeah, absolutely as well. I mean, not everybody can, become a wrestler. There's other ways you can contribute to the business, whether it is, announcing or interviewing like I do, or just managing. There are other roles you can fit that will benefit a company and the wider business. Not everybody, sadly can become
what you do is essential to having actual discussions about wrestling, and it creates more than just it's more than just like jumping in and finding a purpose, because you think about what you're doing, you're actually not only opening the doors to the wrestling business in Scotland, you're delving into the minds of other wrestlers. You're creating a culture, a subculture that runs alongside the wrestling culture in Scotland, so people can go to wrestling shows. And the most that they'll know about another wrestler is probably on social media. That's one of the things that's made it easier. But creating a show and interviews, however you'd want to call it, that helps people delve even deeper into it. And that's why now wrestling podcasts are really important for people to understand the the trials and tribulations, the jubilation of what people have gone through within the wrestling business. And that's what folk like to sit and listen to. They love to hear wrestlers commentate on their own matches. They love to have a wrestler sit down and talk about some kind of crazy night out or a match where something went wrong and things were recovered. And that adds to it. And it's something Scotland's badly needed. And I know Billy does it with the Scottish Wrestling Network. But prior to that, there was another guy who used to try and document everything he could about Scottish wrestling. And I said to him in person, you've no idea how important this is. Because when a lot of these guys you're writing about have gone, and I don't mean they've gone to superstardom or they've gone away to wrestle somewhere else. I mean when they're not with us anymore. And I mean in a couple of 40, 50 years, 80 years, however long it's going to be, it'll be good for younger wrestlers on the scene to look back and go, oh, okay, seeing all these names. And it's a bit more pride in the product that has been Scottish wrestling over the years. It's great that there's people there ready to record it and document it, because there wasn't a lot of that when I started, to the point where I could maybe have wrestled at a Weems Bay holiday camp. There was nobody recording my match. Nobody would really know who I was. So I knew who I was. So I wrote it down. I recorded it. And I would remember things. And of course, it was just a learning experience for me at the time. But I look back and think, that's how I started. Learning the gig was, there might be a missing member of the team for a holiday camp. And it was the case of, right, Euan, are you available? Come along then. Maybe picked up out of the blue. But so what you're doing, and the same with every referee and every announcer, the variety, the competition, the scope of it, the wider it gets, the better it gets, I think. And the more that people aren't competing in a nasty way, but they're always thinking, right, what can I do to be engaging? What can I do to provide? And there's people that will rather watch the Soul Sessions that would rather not watch another Scottish wrestling podcast. You know how I mean?
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely.
So
I feel
that's
like
why it's essential. It's all good stuff.
It really is indeed. Every person I talk to, wherever they're from, obviously here, the States, or whenever, no one conversation is the same. It's different. People have different views. People have different goals. People have a different mindset. It's all variable, and people will have that uniqueness, because at the end of the day, people are unique and they present themselves in a unique way. And obviously, I know you, and you present yourself in a unique way in the past, with a kind of a plague doctor character. And I'm sure if we think about a plague doctor, I think a lot of people in the more common knowledge will obviously think of the villain Marty Scurll. Now, I know obviously you've kind of interacted with Marty in the past. I'd like to know obviously the story of you obviously coming up with this plague doctor gimmick in the first place.
Well, prior to, and again, short, it won't be long. I'll try and make it long. When I started to wrestle, I thought I'd wanted to be some kind of a showman, because I had a top hat and a jacket that had fur on it, and big pink trousers with an open flower that had, instead of it being like the kind of the center of the flower with the petals round it, it was the inside of a gun, as if you were reloading it. And the style was called Roulette Blossom, right? When I started, I just played a showman, and I just called myself E.G. Mackie, and I thought that sounded cool. I imagined the host of the evening, E.G. Mackie, like a compere or something, almost like I was meant to open the show, but I was also part of it. And I thought more of a degree of like burlesque musical theatre in a way. And it was all about showmanship. You could imagine I was maybe coming up to sing, tell jokes, seeing wrestling as theatre, right? And I moved on from that to do something in W3L where myself and Taylor Bryden, who was called Freddie DeFunk at the time, we were the Disco Biscuits, and we wore neon and we just danced and did springboards and flips and kind of fast tag team, high flying wrestling. However, after a while, as much as I enjoyed these things where I'd gone from doing the showman thing, if you think about the character from Beyond the Thunderdome that opens up the fight between Blaster and Mad Max, that was the thing I thought initially. Then the dancing gimmick. Then as that died down, part of me, I wouldn't say within my core, I didn't lose my smile, but part of me thought, I'd watch the Brian Kendrick, Paul London, Chris Sabin, AJ Styles, and these were guys that were known for flying around and wrestling. And then I'd watch me, and I thought, but you're odd, you move around. People go, oh, you're a bit like your Shiro Tajiri. And I think, I'd watch Tajiri and I think, I don't know. I'd watch The Great Muta and go, I don't know. And I thought I'd watch RVD, known for his different movement styles, and I thought, I don't know. And then after a while, I thought, you know what? I'm not like any of these guys. When I do moonsaults, I look like a little hamster doing a backflip. When I do calf kicks, I look like somebody's throwing a monkey into a fight. I look different and I look almost feral. And there's been lots of feral wrestlers that have done that approach. And I watched a lot of the lightweight guys, Jamie Furyk, Robbie Solar, even, I think Solar came a little bit after my gimmick, but at the time, Jamie Furyk was one of the guys who was wrestling from the PBW Academy. And he would do a drop kick, and it looked like a drop kick you'd see on television. I would do a drop kick, and I'd probably land and scurry around in a circle, and I was back up again. And I wasn't realizing I was doing this stuff. And I thought, you know what? I need to embrace my weirdness. I really need to embrace my weirdness, but I want to keep that theatrical edge where almost what I'm doing is a performance. And at the time, I really liked, in fact, I have for years, really liked steampunk culture and the kind of aesthetic of it. So what I did was I had a Venetian carnival mask that is actually a mix of El Dottore, that's where the Plague Doctor mask comes from, and Pantalone, which is in Commedia dell'arte. Pantalone would sometimes be seen as a miser, a villain of the story. Commedia dell'arte had stock characters like Harlequin, who was a dude, right? Or at least usually always was a dude. Columbina, a female character. Piero, Unlucky in Love, another character. But Pantalone was a stock villain. In many ways, how an American like horror films have got stock characters, kind of that idea. Sometimes El Dottore would be a henchman or an assistant to Pantalone, or they'd be in cahoots with each other. But this mask for the Venetian Carnival mask was almost a fused version of Pantalone and El Dottore. And sometimes that would happen where the characters just got combined together. So I had several masks, and that one I thought I quite liked it. And I would try and craft that Plague Doctor aesthetic from it by the steampunk goggles and the mask. I had the top hat already from previous Gimmick. I had the furry jacket. I'd managed to get a hold of a ruffled shirt, and I thought, you know what I'd like to do is when I was training in SWA, people would refer to me as a gremlin, because I said before, drop kicks, scurrying around on the spot and leaving the ring, not even being aware I was doing it. I'd get slammed and do the kind of Homer Simpson run around on the ground, or I'd leap on people with crossbodies, and my hands were like that. And at the time, I wanted to be maybe it didn't seem like I wanted to be super serious, but in my heart, I thought I was looking like an athlete, but instead I was looking like a monster. And I thought, well, you know what, I'm going to be this goblin then. And then initially I thought I would call myself a gnome, but that created connotations where people were thinking, you know, big hat and a fishing rod kind of deal. So anyway, when I put this mask on, it kind of changed a lot for me, and a lot of people saw me try this gimmick out. Not everyone understood it to start with, but when it got going, the real idea was, imagine my portrayal of a human being was this thing coming out to the audience. It was a mask, all this finery, and clearly something underneath it that wasn't wasn't really a normal part of the environment. And I loved the idea of almost like taking if you've got a puppet on your hand, and that's the illusion the whole time. The puppet's here, the puppet's doing, and then you remove the puppet and it's just a hand. Me coming to the ring and removing the clothing was as if to say, I've disguised myself crudely as a human being, and here I am, the real me. At the time, you know, green leopard print or whatever I was wearing, a little tutu, wild hair, and the aspect of that was almost as if I was making an attempt to go walking in the day as other human beings, but my disguise had been made out of a crude look. But a lot of people got the idea that it was a kind of a Plague Doctor look, and I was revealing myself underneath as an even more horrific character. And the thing with Scurll came, at the time I was doing this, he was Party Marty, and I've no ill will towards him, although I make jokes now and again. I found my annoyance came from when it was something he revealed in 2016, 2017. It was strikingly similar to what I was doing, and the only interaction we'd really had is at an SWE show where I was talking about, wouldn't it be cool if somebody's gimmick was they were the world's most evil man or whatever, and they would try and win their matches. And I'm not saying he copied this, but it was the discussion we're having it was lots of people as we're watching the show, and I thought, wouldn't it be funny if this person was like a proper, like they had to win their matches in the most evil way, and they wouldn't sign autographs because they were too evil, and we just laugh about it. And I don't even think he would remember, but I don't think that was him leading to be the villain. But I'd already had interactions in this. He was on the event I was doing. I don't think it's a copying case. I think he probably had a similar idea, because what he did, and this is not an insult to him, but he took the mask off and behaved like a regular person. He was a bad guy, but the mask he probably didn't need. He probably could have just worn the hat and the glasses indoors. Well, no need for that. But umbrella indoors, even weirder. But he could have worn the hat and a cloak and looked a bit like Jack the Ripper. That would have been villain enough for me. Perhaps a pipe, you know. But it was said to me as well by Johnny Moss. Again, he wasn't insulting, but he said, Scurll's got cool entrance gear, Euan, similar to yours, but you're a character from curtain to curtain, and that's the most important thing. And I said, I was thinking about getting rid of the mask, and he was like, don't. Just understand that you're a character for curtain to curtain. Marty has cool entrance gear. And then I realised something, and that was me learning a lesson, is that Scurll provided to an audience something in the ring that they liked, but his entrance gear was kind of irrelevant. Whereas my entrance gear gave you an introduction to this almost like Tim Burton-esque steampunk character who made his way to the ring, and as soon as the stuff came off, as soon as the clothes all came off, he was this erratic, unusual, yet eloquent character underneath that people were able to say, he's a freak. And when I was really freakish, they could hate me. But as a good guy, people could look up and go, oh, okay, he is a freak, but a likable freak, an unusual, eccentric. And that kind of broke the mold for people that had seen John Fire against Chris Water, or, Darren Starr against, Dean Steele, or whatever the stupid superhero names are. Euan G Mackie was genuinely he was just that. And Scurll having a gimmick that was similar, what bothered me is that if I appeared on any posters after Scurll revealed the Plague Doctor look, I was being accused of copying him. There was a Twitter post where somebody had said, oh, can I copy your homework? Yeah, just change a few things. So, that meme, just change a few things so nobody knows you've copied. And it was me and Scurll. Now, me at the time, I was doing a show in Guiseley for W3L. And in the crowd, there were some guys that had just been hooked up with NXT, WWE NXT. I don't think it was them, but I'm pretty sure they must have had a hanger-on who liked his Twitter a bit too much, came along with him. And then underneath the picture was Scurll in Japan. Now, not a lot of people know, some people do, that I was offered time to go to Japan as well, just so you know, right? And I didn't do it because I listened to what everybody said and believed myself to be a comedy no-hoper, so I didn't go. And also, I wish I had done. Anyway, those two pictures, and it was me coming out dragging my spade and Scurll with his umbrella. Now, I would rather not be hit with either of these things, an umbrella or a spade, but a spade would do more damage, just saying. But it was done to mock me. But people came and defended me and said, he's been doing this for years. He did it before Scurll. And I had the best thing. It was that SWE poster, that same event I've spoken about. It goes full circle. Scurll's right beside me on that poster. And I've got the Plague Doctor mask. And I'm like this. I like the Venetian Carnival mask. That look. Scurll's beside me is Party Marty. I thought, victory to me. Victory to me. Here I am. I didn't copy him at all. But that's what the poster's trying to say. That I had copied. And I thought I hadn't. If I ever think I've copied somebody, then I'll change up what I'm doing. If I ever think that something's too similar, I'll change it. And that's why I changed. But I don't hold any ill will towards Scurll. He managed to go off and take that look that he did, but I didn't copy him. And he was slightly different to me. He wasn't nearly as eccentric, but this, again, if he was ever to watch the Soul Sessions, this is not an insult. I thought I made what I did ironclad. He thought he found something cool to add to his routine. He didn't need it. He never needed it. I think he did it so that people would pay attention, and they did. But he was able to go and wrestle in various places. Unfortunately, what he did was he wasn't a plague doctor. He didn't really play up on that. That was just his entrance look. It was completely and utterly irrelevant to what he was doing, which is kind of what I make fun of now, which my look, it goes with this t-shirt, is completely and almost irrelevant to what I do in the ring. Why'd you come out in a big bear costume? Why not? It seems to be, again, it was a slight piss take towards wrestling, thinking, I'll make you all pay attention. Here's a green and black bear costume. Nobody's done that before. And in the case of Scurll, he could have even just come to the ring with a hat on, or carried a deer over his shoulder or anything like that. He was looking for something different, I feel, and exactly why I did as I did years ago. And like 2011 is when I first started to. In fact, 2010 is when I first started to put the whole thing together. I was looking for something different too, and at that time in Scottish wrestling, guys were called things like Blade, or Chris Water and John Fire, and they were all going around with bikers and kick. Well, they weren't all going around with bikers and kick pads, but that was the look. As soon as somebody had new gear, it was as serious and as standard as it could be.
Mm-hmm.
No stars on your gear. You can't have you need to be serious. And anything that was outlandish, people would just roll their eyes at. And like, oh, you're really going to wear that in the ring? And in some cases, people were, hyped to see something different. But it's hard. It's hard to find something within wrestling that you can encapsulate a character when somebody somewhere can just walk out, look physically imposing, and they do the job quite well, and then somebody can go completely and utterly weird, dressed as a Viking, and folk love that too. You really can find it a difficult to hit the nail on the head, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's why I'm more annoyed with the people that came out after Scurll revealed his look and told me I was his stunt double. I was or maybe they didn't really say Tesco value, but people did say, "Oh, are you a snide version? You copying him?" And I thought this was coming from people who knew me prior to this, and it just seemed to have been deleted entirely from their memory banks. That's where the problem was with me. And I thought, you've known me for years. The way you've met me is through wrestling when I looked like that, and now you're telling me I've copied him. Did I go to the future, copy the idea, and come back to the past and start doing it? I didn't. It showed me just how potentially how insecure people are within wrestling about themselves too, that they're too pent up and worried about what they're doing to actually see that somebody like myself was trying to think of something creatively to get by their size, their real, genuine in life unusualness, all of this stuff. So yeah, I'm aware I've gone off into a tangent, but it was to answer your question. I had never had a real problem with Scurll. Him doing it, I kind of thought, you don't need to do this, but you enjoy yourself. It was more what came after, and that's what initially led to me stopping using that look entirely. Is because I thought it had ran its course. When I'd had the drag queen version, the clown version, and the pirate version, I thought I've done this to death. I need to now put it to one side. I could always bring it back, but it needs to have a little break just now. For people that know me and people that have seen it, because it's something that stuck out. But with someone else doing something so similar, it slightly dampens its effect.
Do you ever think you could combine the two? Obviously, the sort of plague doctor with your bear costume. Do you think you ever could combine them to make something new?
Well, I've had ideas. There was I think it was my last FCW title defense. I came out surrounded by all the four forms of the Euan G Mackie's past. We had the Goblin of the Seas, we had Mega Mackie Z, Sasshole the Clown, and the original, the very good Mr. Euan G Mackie, all on, I say they weren't on mannequins, it was more mic stands, but they all looked like there was the hanging clothes, the jackets, the different goggles for each one, the hats, the masks, all of them, as I came out wearing my old, and one of the first pairs of the goggles I'd had underneath the bear costume with a flag that had the Neo Paradigm symbol. And it was weird. It was like I was surrounded by ghosts of the past as I came out in this new form. to combine them, the idea has been, for me anyway, as an understanding the prospect of being the monarch of ruin. People are always the king of this style or the king of that style, and if they're not a king of something style, the people have always got an odd prefix, or there's always like like there's some kind of there's somebody from somewhere with a thing that did this, and people add that to their wrestling persona and their wrestling name. And I thought, I'll completely denounce this. There will be no very good. There will be no Goblin of the Skies. We need rid of all this nonsense. If I'm going to refer to myself as a monarch of ruin, I have to have nothing, and I have to be happy with that. The whole point of this concept of being in the bear costume was almost like a last ditch desperate attempt for people to notice that to notice me, right? As well as the fact that I've always been odd or always been different. If I was to, I mean, the most oddest thing I could do, I guess, the weirdest thing would be just to be a normal wrestler. That would be the weirdest thing. But to be to have absolutely nothing but a broken, fallen kingdom, and it puts me in a position where when I have to say to other wrestlers, you better hope you beat me, because if I beat you, it's an easy story for you to tell. If you beat me, it's a harder story for you to tell if I beat you. And it goes back to the years and years I've wrestled where people are like, you're too small, you're just, all you do is this and comedy. And I think, oh, did you know, that double jump 450 wasn't comedy, was it? Oh, it's because we did a silly spot at the start, so therefore it was comedy. And I'm only 5'2", so clearly not a real human being. But all the big fat dudes that are wrestling on this show, they're the real guys. They're the guys that got knackered after 5 minutes. I'm sorry I did a Nassim flip into the ring. I'm showing off. I'll just forget. I'll just go back to being the dirt under your shoe then, right? So you can feel better about yourself. And that's why now I think all the potential that probably was there, I've reached a point where I'm very glad to have been part of wrestling, very glad to still get opportunities and to achieve things. But I feel that the hype of having nothing, well, not so much the hype, but that feeling of having nothing, I've got to a point where I thought, what did I miss out on? And I've let it get to me. I've let this bitterness and this nastiness get to me to put me to a point where I now feel a degree of emptiness where I think I could have done a bit more. So with calling myself a monarch of ruin is almost like the negativity that follows me eventually spills into the other aspects of wrestling, the other aspects of wrestling characters. So whether or not I manage to land a hit on any wrestler in the ring, you're going to be dragged down to my level in some way, shape, or form. And I'm sorry about that. Sorry, that's going to happen.
Well, you've dragged quite a few people to your level, because obviously Bleeding Gums Wrestling, where obviously we first became acquainted. You know,
yeah.
you're undefeated in singles competition within Bleeding Gums. You know, you have that.
That's true.
Really.
And every way you've seen, it's been through some kind of sneaky underhand tactic. Some folk would say that, but a lot of it's on the spot thinking as well. And it's like I say, I always say to people, you better hope you beat me, because if I beat you, it's going to be a lot more embarrassing. You've got a lot more things at your disposal and a lot more advantages. But if I manage it with as little as I've got, what does that say about you?
Yeah,
you know?
Very true indeed. I would love to know the story of how you first really became acquainted with Bleeding Gums. Obviously, you know Andrew the man, he's a funny guy. I want to know the story of first becoming acquainted with the boy.
Well, Andrew and I met, it was a weird domino effect when we went, years ago now, man. I realised Andy was a wrestling fan through conversations we'd had, like, because I was starting to wrestle, and his friend Steve, who I've always said was not just because he was called Steve, but he had like loads of rings, so he was either a mob boss or a pirate. And him and Steve and a few other folk, but they were the guys that I'd met. And I can remember coming back to Steve's, sure it was Steve's, one night, and I had a wrestling event the next day, and I said, look, I've had a bit to drink, not loads, but I'm going to try and stay a wee bit sober. So they were offering me drinks, and I thought, no. And I said, I've got a show tomorrow. And Steve already knew I was a wrestler. Andy'd known as well, because he'd seen me on posters, but we'd never had a real chance to speak. And I'd known Andy off and on, and we'd met on nights out in Kirkcaldy, but we didn't know each other that well. But this one night, Andy started to speak to me about deathmatch wrestling and American indie stuff. And the fact that I knew the promotions, knew the people, and I knew who he was talking about as well. And we talked about FMW as well, and he just lit up like that, and he was like, "Oh man, I love this," and we started to speak, and I thought I really have to get home, but I was speaking until maybe the early hours of the morning, eating a munchie box. So we're thinking this must be about 2015, 2016. But I'd known him prior, but this was the first time we got to sit down and speak. And that's how we hit it off. Again, like I say, we knew each other, but this was the first time we actually got to speak one-on-one. And my biggest worry when I spoke to Andy was, is he going to be one of, like we talked about these people before that spoke about AEW, is he going to be like that? Is he going to be one of these punters that's like, oh, I love this wrestler, and this could be a wrestler that botches every single match, and I'd be like, oh yeah, I've wrestled in this place and I met this wrestler, and he'd just move on to the next topic, which was, no, you do play wrestling. No, you think you're a wrestler. I mean, in the guys that are on telly frequently. And I thought, I hope he's not going to be like this to me. And he wasn't, of course. But sometimes you meet fans who go, oh, I've seen you wrestle. I've seen you on the poster. Did you watch WrestleMania? And I'll go, no, because I was living my life, or I was maybe wrestling somewhere else, because they think that I'm doing wrestling I mean, in a level where they think I've just decided, oh, this weekend I'm going to be a wrestler, the same way I'm going to play five-a-side. But Andy wasn't like that. He was completely and utterly respectful towards it, and I thought, I like this. I like the fact that he as he was saying, I love the ultra violence, I love the deathmatch wrestling, and his extensive knowledge and his passion towards it made me think, you know what, I respect this, and I understand it because I'm the same. And we were able to kind of time travel together back to a point where our wrestling interests met, where we both kind of got into the same thing. And from there, I thought, you know what? I really appreciate that his mindset's similar to how mine was before I started to wrestle, but he had a great level of appreciation. And because of that, I think that's why when Andy was thinking of running Bleeding Gums, he came to me. Now, I'm not a fountain of knowledge about promoting or anything like that, but all I did was offer some advice. I know he'd had his experience down in England with Rise and various other promotions he'd helped out. He's not an idiot, and he knows what he's doing. And that's why I had to explain this to so many people up here as well who are going, who is this guy? Why is he running? What's he doing? Because you can't suddenly appear in the wrestling scene in Scotland without having to be either a fraud or everybody's pal. So I explained to people, he's doing something very different. He knows what he's doing. He has real passion and dedication for this, and he's aware of his audience. And there's people out there who have promoted for a long time who still don't know their audience. They'll still get people in, they'll still draw good crowds, but they don't know their audience. But Andy knows his audience, and he knows how to schedule and prepare a show in the culture of deathmatch wrestling that's going to get people in, and it's going to be memorable. And there are people I know that would go, oh, I don't know about this, oh, it's quite violent, who have been converted all because of what Bleeding Gums has provided and the way it's been done. And that's the most important thing now, is that he's possibly inundated by loads of wrestling CVs of guys who want to be involved. But Andy's not playing a popularity game in Scotland either. He will do as he wants. As he said, he'll try not to step on anybody's toes, but he will do as he desires. And he's not going to get in the way of anybody's business.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. But if he keeps doing as he does, he's more than capable of it. And there's no market like that in Scotland as well. There's no other deathmatch promotion. I know ICW had the King of Insanity deathmatch, but Andy provides the ultra violence. And because no one else is doing it, he's found a market where people are ready to travel from everywhere to see this. And the way it's promoted is probably done as best as it could be, I think. Andy would probably disagree, but he's a tour de force when he goes out there and he puts posters up and he pushes the product towards an audience that wants it. And I'm so proud that he's taken that approach, and I'm so proud that he's proven himself. Him speaking to me about it in Witherspoons a couple of years ago, going, "Oh well, if I lose money, at least I can say I've done it." I don't think he had that much confidence in himself, but to get to this point now, where Bleeding Gums has actually almost punched its way into Scottish wrestling culture with a bloodied fist, with glass wrapped up on tape You know, it's done that, and I'm glad, and I'm happy to be part of it, because Andy, and again, I'm not selling myself like this, but he said I would be a good fit for it because I had a kind of a stinking little attitude about everything, and he needed something that was slightly different. You've got your deathmatch wrestlers, but then you need to have something that can engage an audience, that gives like a palate cleanser. I believe that's kind of what my role is right now, is a palate cleanser that can make the audience react. Billy Strachan, if he's watching, which he probably is, pleasuring himself to wicked extremes, maybe, he said before about what I do in the ring, and I often hear him say, if it had been anybody different, been any other time of the night, wrestling show, any other situation, this wouldn't have worked, but it did because Euan G Mackie did it at that time. And that's his way of saying there's only really one way it could have worked, and that's if Euan had been there to do it. And it doesn't mean to say I'm better than anybody. It's more of a case there are certain jobs within a wrestling event that I seem to slot into. So if it's audience interaction, something happening, a freak occurrence happening in a wrestling match that suddenly I react to, adds to the show. And it's almost like that's the anthropic principle, the right place, the right time. And I feel that Andy's got lots of guys who will do death matches, but he's also thinking, I need something that's kind of like a dainty cyclone of madness to fly through this space within a show to give people something else at this event. And that's why I think I'm there. There's the language, there's the quips that I do in the ring, there's the style, there's everything that comes with me, I reckon. And when Andy said he'd love to have me on board, I was like, thank you. It gives me a chance to actually explore what I can do in a different environment. And so I was glad. I know that sounds like I've bigged myself up there, but what it meant is I found a place where I could fit, and fit without a struggle. And I thought I'd love to do this. So that's I'm incredibly grateful for Andy letting me have that opportunity as well.
Yeah, he's given so much of his opportunities, and it's a great atmosphere to have within the wrestling scene up here in Scotland. You know what, Euan G Mackie, my friend, we're gonna have to cut this one short right here, right now. There's some things coming up, but I want to make a promise, and this is the first I've done this, and this is the first for you. I'm gonna have you back on next year. That's a fucking guarantee.
Oh wow, okay.
You'll be coming back on.
I feel privileged for that now.
Well,
thank you.
I love the conversation. I want more of you on here. So 2025, folks, you can expect more of Euan G Mackie on this show. But of course, folks, for now, this episode is wrapping up. If you loved what you've heard of more of Mr. Mackie, his Instagram link will be down in the description below. Click on it.
Cheers.
His merch there. Buy some as well, because it's a very nice shade of green. But nonetheless, folks, finish up your pints, put your chairs away, and thank you as always for tuning in for another episode of the Soul Sessions.
Now I'm out there, gonna live like